is a very fascinating, complicated type of supercomputer that often we as humanity take for granted. But for an understanding of its processes and how they affect us in our daily lives, we turn to psychology for answers. What if I told you that the same tool of understanding was being used against you every day by the mass media? I'm sure even the most astute scholars would not be shocked. Our habitual definition of the reality beyond our own four walls being shaped by the elites is well documented in the mainstream political narrative. But what if this subversion, this perversion of our psyches, is deeper than you could ever imagine? Psychology is an enthralling subject because it can be used to easily predict the nature of human responses to outside stimuli. The elite's investment into experiment-based research has revealed tons of fascinating processes that satiate the sleeping pseudoscientists, but also provides a valuable resource of scientifically backed information to the truly awake, critically thinking mind. A very simple, widely quoted experiment would be the one of Pavlov's dogs, used to prove classical conditioning. He essentially took the neutral stimulus of a bell and connected the dog's salivation response to it by creating a positive association with being fed. Essentially, the bell equals food. This is critically important to the reasoning behind the elite gender inversion. But before we discuss this most important topic, we must discuss a bit more psychology. Religious leaders often recite a quote commonly attributed to Saint Francis Xavier, and it goes like this: "Give me the child until he is 7, and I'll give you the man." What he is really talking about is the idea that if you are conditioned early enough to accept an ideology, it will stick with you until you are an adult. Simple, logical. We hold this belief almost innately in the form of our view of parenthood, or the idea that 2 good eggs will raise another good egg. Life is not always this simple, but it sure follows logic. This demonstrates perfectly the psychological concept of modeling. Sounds simple, but it has 2 separate definitions, both being relatively important. One is used in a counseling setting in which the client implicitly learns by imitation alone, without any specific verbal direction. This is critically important because it is 1, well researched, and the entire cognitive behavior therapy model holds its foundations in this concept, and 2, it demonstrates that those human models of behavior in our lives can profoundly influence our own behavior without our explicit awareness or consent. I know, you're probably like, John, come on, why are you giving us all of this psychobabble? And to that I say, let's continue on with modeling, because you will understand in the next few minutes how vitally important your understanding of these concepts really is. The second form of the psychological modeling concept is the general process in which persons serve as models for others, exhibiting the behavior to be imitated by others. That's pretty straightforward, but really, think about the society around you. For supposedly being the most advanced civilization to have ever populated the earth, we are walking on parallel train tracks with George Orwell's dystopian Oceania, speeding towards our eventual total subjugation. If the concept of modeling is so essential to our early development, who are we modeling as one collective humanity unit? Who are the people that we share in our lives across the westernized world? I'll give you a hint. We see them through a square screen projected into our living rooms. If you have noticed, there's something very strange about the plot lines that we see on standard television programming. Usually we see a normal child go off the beaten path because of drugs, bad influences, or pubescent sex. Something like that. We never see a plot line that blames school indoctrination, ingestion of exogenous chemicals, or the inherent influence of the programming aspect of TV programming. This isn't a diet documentary, nor a critique of Common Core. This is about an aspect of television programming that is so widespread and so sinister that you may have a hard time wrapping your head around it. This documentary is about the elite gender inversion. Did it happen? Is your jaw on the floor? What am I looking at? Is that Sandra Bullock? Cher? Yes, it did happen. Yes, it is true. You are looking at the Adam's apples of some of the most famous women that you have grown up with, and yes, that is Sandra Bullock. Just breathe. This is quite literally the tiniest step into the science of transvestigation that you could possibly take. Transvestigation, but John, what? Transvestigation is the science of using biological gender markers to determine the sex of another person without DNA evidence. These gender markers take shape in the form of the following characteristics in men. Growing an Adam's apple, a wide jaw from the front, and a completely square jaw from the side, square shoulders, brow bossing or the thickening of the brow ridge above the eye, a sloping back forehead, high wide cheekbones, having a tree trunk-like neck and narrow hips with a straight up and down body contour. Did you catch that? The defining characteristics of a man? An Adam's apple. A wide jaw from the front and a completely square jaw from the side. Square shoulders. Brow bossing or the thickening of the brow ridge above the eye. A sloping back forehead. High, wide cheekbones, having a tree trunk-like neck, and narrow hips with a straight up and down body contour. I will be focusing on those traits listed before, but there are more than 20 different factors that go into the science of transvestigation. This list is not exhaustive. The photos of the following people have been confirmed in person to be the gender that they present as. This is the typical female face. She has an oval face that comes to a point, narrow cheekbones, absence of brow bossing, narrow jaws, a tiny neck that concaves on the sides, and close-set eyes. Here we have a photo of the typical female profile. Her face comes to a point at the chin. She has a sloping jawbone that rounds at the mandible, proportionally small ears, a forehead contour that runs straight up from the nose bridge and rounds out mid-forehead, and an absence of brow bossing. Here we have a photo of 4 typical women, but I am focusing on the far left and the far right. They both have slanted shoulders, tiny delicate necks, oval faces that come to a point, narrow cheekbones, and hips in proportion to the shoulders themselves. Here we see the female hips. As you can clearly see, the male hips are more vertical and the female hips are wider to birth a child. Here we have a comparison between the female and male anatomy. Females have narrow shoulders, a hip indentation above the navel, proportionally smaller rib cages, fat distribution at the thighs, typically smaller feet, tiny necks that concave on the sides, proportionally smaller shoulders that are slanted, delicate female hands, smaller wrist and ankle joints, smaller knee and shoulder joints. The length from the hip to the knee is longer. The length from the shoulder to hip is shorter. The female on the far right has a widow's peak where the hair comes to a point on the forehead. This is a predominantly female trait. Now, you are probably asking yourself, what? I never knew that there was so much differentiation between the genders other than what's down below the belt, and I am here to say that neither did countless other people until some real research was conducted into the post-pubescent transgendering process and truly discovering how hormones differentiate the sexes. We are going to take a look at the post-pubescent transgendering process, the power of hormones and surgery, and how important these gender differentiations become when trying to pass yourself off as one gender or the other. You may have thought this information was only important to transgendered people, but it is vital for you to understand as well. Here we have the before and after of a post-pubescent transgendered female. As you can tell, she looks dramatically more feminine on the right, and there are very specific reasons for this. She has only had a single surgery from the first picture to the second picture. She has had a forehead recontouring in which they shave down the brow ridge. In the picture on the right, you can see that her eyes are no longer set back in her skull, and that her forehead looks dramatically smoother without the brow ridge. In this single surgery, they brought down her hairline an inch and raised her brows to give more of a feminine arch. Do you see why it is important to understand the transgendering process yet? Here we have another post-pubescent transgendered female. She has had a forehead recontouring, rhinoplasty, chin and jaw recontouring, a lip lift, and an Adam's apple reduction. Again, she looks dramatically more female than she did before, and there are very specific reasons for this. This is the post-pubescent transgendered female from profile. What I want you to notice is that no matter how much jaw contouring you do, you cannot escape the straight back contour from the chin of the male jaw. This one still also has the classical sloping back forehead. As you can see, they could eliminate most of it, but it still remains. When you see a true biological female next to these plastic surgery creations, the stark contrast in facial characteristics just jumps out at you. Are you transvestigating yet? Can you see the differences between the left and the right? Do you need me to put them on the screen? This is how every transvestigator has started in their journey of truth on the actual gender differences. Is the checklist resonating in your head? Narrow cheekbones, pointed chin, oval face, straight up and down forehead contour. Are you looking in the mirror? Do you appreciate your own natural-born female or male attributes? We are all born with various natural traits, and as I have demonstrated, these traits can all be in different proportions. If you are a female saying, "But wait, I have brow bossing," or "My forehead slants back," then I urge you to reconsider the list of over 20 attributes that are examined by transvestigators. You will find that you have the vast majority of your own natural-born gender's biological markers. Knowledge of the history of the elite gender inversion is necessary to understand how much is actually understood about this process of prepubescent transgendering by the elite themselves. The earliest form of gender inversion was in the form of eunuchs, and then later the famed castrati, whom were castrated in prepubescent to maintain the flexibility, range, and timbre of their voices. It is documented that the castration had several anomalous effects on the body, such as the bone joints not hardening, causing the limbs of the castrati to grow unusually long, and allowed the ribs to grow out larger than a normal singer's. The true nature of this type of castration is not known because, as demonstrated by the quote on the screen, The elite have kept secrets from us for far longer than we could ever know. In their time, these were the elite. These were the celebrities. So many were being castrated that only the elite of the elite made it to the opera stage, the others being sent to infiltrate the church. As we know, over time the accumulation of knowledge on a specific subject snowballs, and this particular knowledge of anatomical slice and dice has been going on since minimally 400 AD. Alessandro Moreschi was the last surviving, publicly lauded castrato, taking his last breath well into the 20th century. The practice of elite gender inversion, prepubescent transgendering, has always been a secret and has never ceased to exist. The stage has been set, but are you ready for the performance? I'm quite serious because this might be the most shocking moment that you have ever had in your life. No, I am not going to show you some hermaphrodite crotch and catfish you, but what I am going to do is quite a bit worse. Just prepare yourself for a paradigm switch, because what you have been sold by Hollywood is an inverted fantasy land designed to subvert your mind and your conception of what is truly beautiful in each gender. This documentary is called Elite Gender Inversion because you will soon realize that this type of transgendering is happening in every layer of elite society, from singers to athletes to actresses to princesses, and even, as you might have already heard, first ladies. One of, if not the most disgusting, vile, sick, and perverted aspects to this insanity is that this is happening vastly before a celebrity has even gone through puberty. This has been proven to be quite clear. Transvestigation is a science that is first technical and second visual. I will first explain each aspect of gender differentiation and then allow the pictures to speak for themselves, chiming in when necessary. Please get through this part of the video as it is the most important so far. Every person featured in this documentary has a full facial and body analysis that is linked to in the description. Oh, yeah. Remember all of that psychology we learned earlier? Keep all of it in mind because things are going to get quite technical in a moment. The Adam's apple is probably the most readily recognized gender marker of them all and is the enlarged laryngeal tissue of a male. The reason why so many elite transgenders do not have an Adam's apple is because it typically develops after a full male puberty. These elites suppress that puberty by castration, chemical or surgical, and give exogenous estrogen in order to maintain the prepubescent male characteristics that merge with female sex characteristics to create the ultimate in-between. The male jaw is different from the female jaw in a couple extremely apparent ways. The male jaw is far larger than the female jaw, manifesting in the extreme width from the front. From the side, the male jaw is completely square, the bone going straight back from the chin to the back of the mandible, where an almost 90-degree angle forms. In a true female jaw, the bone typically slopes from the chin to the back of the mandible, creating a soft, round profile and finally rounding up at the back of the mandible. Do you notice the high, wide cheekbones? Do you notice how far back the hairline is and the lack of the widow's peak? The flatness of the chin, the square face, notice that the point of the chin does not fall in line with the jaw, indicating surgical implant. Do you notice the size of the ears in proportion to the head? Again, look at the point of that chin. The sloping back forehead. The differences in the shoulders of the sexes can seem subtle because our eyes are not used to really looking for them, but once you start to examine, it will jump at you. Men have broad, square shoulders that after a full male puberty typically fit 3 widths of the head from end to end. Women typically have sloping, slanted shoulders that can fit 2 to 2.5 widths of the head from end to end. The shape is the key because these elite transgenders have not gone through the full male puberty. Do you see the brow bossing, the general shape of the face? The disproportionately long arms? Brow bossing, or the thickening of the brow ridge above the eye, is a predominantly male trait. It is usually quite noticeable on a post-pubescent male, but the elite transgenders usually only get a slight version of this, and many choose to have a surgery that actually removes this from their faces. It is probably the most dramatic facial feminization surgery that one can have. You notice the completely square shoulders? The sloping back forehead is another predominantly male trait that can be seen in prepubescence, but is personified in a fully post-pubescent male. The male forehead typically slopes back from right above the brow ridge, while the female forehead is typically straight up from the nose bridge and starts gradually rounding out in the middle of the forehead. In the elite transgenders, we see the typical male facial structure where the nose bridge dips in and then creates a slight bump at the brow ridge and recedes backwards, starting at the brow ridge. Remember that the sloping back of the forehead starts right at the brow ridge in males. Do you notice the completely square jaw? The male neck is also one of the easiest signs to see when it comes to a transgendered elite. Women tend to have necks that concave in the middle and get wider at the bottom, while men have a large tree trunk-like straight neck. This is a trait where pictures speak 1,000 words. It's kind of difficult to not notice the Adam's apple on this one. Marilyn Monroe was confirmed to have a chin implant. Female hips are one of the most recognizable and beautiful aspects of a natural woman. Women have wider hips for carrying children, where the navel tends to actually sit below the hip indentation on the torso. Men typically have quite narrow hips with a straight up and down body contour and a navel that sits below the waist indentation. In real females, the shoulders tend to fall in line with the hips. Do you notice how large the heads are on some of these elite? Looks like a couple ribs are missing on that rib cage. As transvestigations have been produced, another aspect that usually outs an elite transgender is rib removal. The rib removal creates an artificial waist, but at the same time reveals the artificiality of the proportions because the shoulders become far too wide. Cher was rumored to have ribs removed, and her gender was publicly questioned when she began her career. Marilyn Monroe was also rumored to have ribs removed, and you can clearly see the scar in this picture, and also you can clearly see the body frame of a man. These are the before and afters of 2 chin implant surgeries. Notice how dramatically it changes the silhouette of the face, but how subtle the effect really is. Here we have the before and afters of 4 hip implant surgeries. They will never pass as the true hips of a woman, only a false Hollywood-sold fantasy inversion. Some of you will ask about the voices of these elite transgenders and why they are feminine sounding. Have you ever really considered the idea that what you are hearing is just a prepubescent male voice all grown up without a puberty? No? I will show you a clip of what is possible with surgery. Notice how it is a science in and of its own, but remember that if someone has been castrated in prepubescence, they will maintain the pitch of their prepubescent voice. The elite know exactly how this works.
Rainbow Passage. When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors. These take the shape of a long round arch, with its path high above, and its 2 ends apparently beyond the horizon.
Rainbow Passage. When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors. These take the shape of a long arch, with its path high above, and its 2 ends apparently beyond the horizon. There is, according to legend, a boiling pot of gold at one end. People look, but no one ever finds it. When a man looks for something beyond his reach, his friends say he's looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
If you made it this far, I hope you are okay. That feeling of every nerve from the top of your neck to the bottom of your spine electrified, buzzing? It's the truth, and the truth is something we are conditioned to understand as something more frightening than fiction. But what is truly frightening? That for an entire lifetime you have spent thousands of hours in front of a television screen, absorbing the blatant glorification of transgenderism, and probably spent your most important developmental years preferentially conditioning your brain while it is most malleable to think that this is normal. You have been sold a false paradigm, and some of you are saying, "But John, I never grew up with TV. I was not being subverted by these elite transgenders. Do you remember how I defined modeling in terms of actual therapy? If all of the people around you behave positively to a certain stimulus, you will subliminally adapt that same ideal. Do you get it? We keep each other in this same paradigm just by the very power of the majority believing in the paradigm." You probably have so many questions that it is hard to even comprehend. The rabbit hole is a place where questions turn into questions, answers, and more questions. But trust me, all of the questions you have about the elite gender inversion have been answered. To start, you're probably asking why, which is, of course, the most important question, and the only one I will not address here. It has been answered elsewhere. The questions of how, when, and where have also been answered, so let's discuss the who. Extensive research has been done into the family trees of the elites that are in control of the modern world. This has revealed that every single president shares familial ties. Dozens of Hollywood stars have been linked, some by only a single generation. Obama is even linked to Tiger Woods. Have you ever wondered why so many celebrities look alike? How many people do you know in your life that look stunningly similar? You were born into a pre-owned plane with the hope that you would die before ever understanding the nature of your own slavery. The television has been a source of escape, but also chains that I hope to have broken. Our entire reality is being written for us by a quill whose ink is composed of the fear of social rejection on a paper whose mind is too weak from deliberate malnutrition and pointless menial tasks labeled as a career, whose agency is under the guise of science bought and paid for by the same elite whose families have had their hand in the guidance of humanity for hundreds of years. This quill, this instrument of predetermined destiny, has been writing a very specific plotline for humanity that has bloomed into fruition all that it was scripting and more. Are you humanity? Are you ready to swallow the pill of reality?